Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. It's my first time in Taipei. So yeah, really excited to be here. Today, the title of my talk is On-Chain Graphs and Public Goods. Cool. Okay, let's do this. So I spent the last 15 years studying networks. And the first few years of my career, actually, I was focusing on a very different form of networks. I was focusing on music creation networks, how artists interact with other artists, how new genres of music evolve, and how artists interact with listeners. And then the last 5 years, I've been obsessing with open source software dependencies and the networks that this forms. So graphs really fascinate me. And one of my favorite graphs is this one, actually. So this is coming from the Nix package manager. For the software engineers in the room, this runtime and build dependency graph is probably not a surprise for you, but what I really love about this graph is that you see this in software more than anything else. You see how our world is so interconnected and how everything actually depends on everything else. So I really think that this graph reveals a profound truth about our species. And that is that we are all interdependent and our success hinges upon the success of others. So when I started getting involved with Ethereum in 2016, I got really excited about this vision of the world computer. Having this one database with cryptographic primitives, cryptographic identities, programs on chain was something that was really, really exciting for me. I thought that the composability and the transparency of Ethereum would enable killer applications to be built, specifically when it comes to public goods. And if you think about this, especially so many years later, Ethereum is a graph, right? And I don't mean it in the technical term that Ethereum is a graph database, but I mean this in a more mathematical term, that Ethereum is kind of like a graph structure where you have accounts, right? Cryptographic entities interacting with other cryptographic entities, and then you have these accounts again interacting with programs, right? That we call them smart contracts. And any of you that have spent some time on Etherscan, you can probably feel that, right? You can take an address and then start navigating that graph and finding yourself in weird places. So I always thought that this is brilliant for funding public goods and using that data set, but unfortunately, so many years later, it seems that it's mostly companies related with on-chain analytics that are really leveraging that graph, and there's not much else happening, at least on that scale. So I've been thinking, can we go beyond that? Can we actually build something more meaningful that is leveraging this graph structure of Ethereum? So some of the projects that started, experimenting on that vein, started to appear. One of the more interesting projects that came out, I think 4 years ago, is called Circles. So this is a project coming out of Berlin, Germany, which is also where I'm based in. And what Circles did was to take an old concept, which is this idea of a web of trust, right? That every human has a trusted group of peers effectively around them that they interact with, and then use that to disseminate information. And in the case of Circles UBI, actually they created an interesting mechanism where effectively they would incentivize connectedness. They were using personal tokens and a universal basic income in order for you to actually, reveal your social graph on chain. That's one way to think about this. And I think it was really the first application that tried to do something that was leveraging this networked view on Ethereum. Another project that really sparked some, basically really inspired some of the work that we're doing with Drips was Mirror. So Mirror is a decentralized publishing platform. And in 2021, they, of course, had the ability for you to share content and then use decentralized storage for that. But then when NFTs started to take off, they also started enabling effectively auctions around NFTs. And one of the really simple things that they did that was very inspiring to me was to actually bring this graph structure, like bring this at the forefront of the UI. So for any auction that was taking place, they had this view of what they called the split list effectively, where instead of you seeing only one address of who was the person behind that blog post effectively, they started having these lists where you can actually, like on-chain, specify a group of people that potentially was responsible for that specific piece of content, and a split configuration. So any proceeds that would be raised from funding that non-fungible token would be programmatically splitted with a bunch of different addresses. And it was one of the first applications that actually leveraged this graph-based view and brought it at the forefront. It's the simplest structure, but what Mirror did was to actually bring it at the forefront of the user experience. So moving to some of the work that we've been doing with Drips, I always kept thinking, can we use these on-chain graphs to fund digital public goods and specifically free and open source software? And the problem that I've been obsessing over the years is I believe that is really illustrated by this meme. This is an internet meme that effectively what you see here is that you have all shiny modern digital infrastructure, and then these little boxes are its dependencies. And then you see at some point that like your shiniest infrastructure actually depends on a single person somewhere somewhere in the world that is really in the night keeping try to keep the lights on and try to keep the software patched and up and running. And I really feel that this is one of the biggest gaps that we have when we're thinking about funding public goods. There's a lot of experimentation, a lot of interesting things that are happening within the blockchain world with regards to funding public goods, a lot of interesting experiments with quadratic funding, a lot of interesting experiments with retroactive public goods funding. But I really feel that, solving this, finding a sustainable income for that one individual and making sure that our structures are actually stable is one of the open problems that we as a community need to solve. So when I realized that this is one of the things that we collectively need to solve, I started working on something that's called Drips. And Drips is a really simple idea, and it's a toolkit for you to fund your critical software dependencies. The way it works is the following. So at the core of the user experience, you have this list. Anyone can create any on-chain list, effectively give it a title. And then these lists contain either Ethereum addresses or ENS names, and one of the innovations that we're bringing to the table. As you can see there, these are GitHub repos. So you actually have the possibility to construct a list. In this case, this is a list that my organization has created. We call them Drips dependencies, and then effectively start funding it, right? So what you see there is a bunch of different projects and an amount. And one of the interesting things that we're doing with Drips is that you have the possibility to either fund this as a one-off payment, a single donation, or actually stream into it. So you have this continuous flow of funding that is taking place. Now, if you look at the dependencies there, the third project is a really well-known project called ethers.js. This is one of the projects that most of the crypto projects actually depend on. And in our case, this person is receiving 13% of whatever funding is going into that list. And the interesting thing that we're doing with it is continuing to operate in that graph-based mindset. So the moment this maintainer actually gets to claim the funds, we ask them to do the exact same thing. We basically tell them like, hey, you have a bunch of income, come claim it. And then when you do that, specify who are the maintainers and who are your own critical software dependencies. And through that process, effectively, a graph emerges. right? So you have these lists of lists. We funded Ether.js, and then Ether.js basically says that whatever comes to my wallet, 12% will be splitted with ENS normalized.js, ensuring effectively that funding will reach the lowest levels of the stack. Funding will reach this one single random person that is tirelessly maintaining a software package somewhere in the world. So and as I mentioned, you can do this as a one-off, you can do this as a continuous stream of funds, creating a sustainable form of income effectively for that. So yeah, so these are some applications, and I want to take the last part of my presentation to talk about what these on-chain graphs really enable for public goods funding. If you are an organization out there, what could you be doing with on-chain graphs? So the way I like to think about this is that blockchains and the applications that are emerging around blockchains enable new behaviors. And because economics is a behavioral science, as a result, they also enable new economics. Some of the ideas that I'm really passionate about are these. The first one is, I feel that we are about to see a lot of organizations, a lot of DAOs, and a lot of traditional organizations that are programmatically and transparently. I think this. Okay, we're back. Great. So I feel that we are about to see a lot of DAOs and a lot of traditional organizations programmatically linking their own profits with the public goods that they depend on. And again, Ethereum provides a brilliant infrastructure in order to do this. Luckily, we have already started seeing some of those examples. One of the most fascinating ones that a lot of people are talking about at the moment is coming from the Optimism Collective. The Optimism Collective, together with Vitalik Buterin, created this idea of retroactive public goods funding. And what do is that they provide a layer 2 on Ethereum, right? And then the more demand there is for block space, that translates into revenue to their own sequencer. And what they do is now they actually start channeling some of that revenue back into RetroPGF that effectively funds a lot of public goods that are being created that further fuel the growth of the OP ecosystem, right? And I think up to date, they have allocated, I think, something around $50 million, in fact. So significant amounts of funding, start into, are being put into this flywheel. Another great example that is taking place at the moment is something called Protocol Guild. And, no worries. Can you hear me okay? Yes? Perfect. So another great example that is taking place at the moment of the similar idea is coming from a project called Protocol Guild. Protocol Guild is basically a group of Ethereum maintainers that got together and they realized that the incentives are not there for them to keep building the infrastructure for Ethereum. These are really, the low-level stack behind what you all see as, the Ethereum network. And so what did these maintainers do? They basically said, what if we actually, curate a list of all of the different individuals that maintaining critical parts of the Ethereum infrastructure, and then we go around and we effectively ask for money. So what they've done is they went to DAOs like Lido or Uniswap, and they said, hey, you all benefit from our work. What if you actually start channeling some of that capital back to us? And that started taking place, and I was very excited about that. But then a few months ago, another very interesting thing happened, which was a traditional organization called VanEck, based in the US, that was actually working on an Ethereum ETF. They came out with an announcement that says that whatever profits they have, 10% of those profits from that Ethereum ETF will actually be put back into Protocol Guild. So effectively, they became the first traditional organization to actually programmatically channel some of their own profits into the Ethereum digital public goods. And that's very, very exciting. I really think that we're going to see a lot more organizations doing the exact same thing. So another thing that I believe that's now possible is a similar idea, but is slightly different. For the people in the room that you already operate in a DAO that has a governance token, I think you should all consider allocating a portion of your governance power, your decision-making power, into your own dependencies. We think that it's a really cool way for you to give voice to the people that actually enable your work, that make your work possible, and then slowly start introducing them to your own community. Finally, the last idea I have is that, hypercerts, you can absolutely use them, but you can of course use them in a more, 1 degree out type of way, but you can also use them in this more graphed way, where if your funding actually has a big impact in a low-level part of the stack, we can now acknowledge that with hypercerts. We can make that visible. We're having some technical difficulties, but I'm almost done. So yeah, that's pretty much that. If I can close with one idea, this is the one. We are all interdependent, and our success hinges upon the success of others. If your organization is interested in funding public goods, please come talk to us. Thank you so much.